Okay, and this is something a bit different for Halloween. And I don't normally do this live, so this is really interesting for me. I'll read some stories, some H.P. Lovecraft, something I put together, and also some I.M.R. James, so a couple of classic spooky stories in there. And hopefully everything's going to be working well, because it seems to, but we've been having lots of problems with the internet here recently. So if you're there, feel free to say hello. Okay, no one's really saying anything at the moment. I'm just going to flip through my book here. Yeah, we are doing kind of mix of technologies, all this fancy modern stuff to stream. And here I am with a book to read from. It's a nice way to do it. But I hope your Halloween is going well. Okay, and I can already see that something's not happy. Oh, great. Network connections from the Yukon, I tell ya. So, I'm just flipping through the book here to find the right page. Well, welcome to all two of you who are currently watching. Oh, it's just gone. Wow, I say hello to two people and then it goes down to one. Well, just give it a minute or two, just I want people to realise I'm doing something different, see if anyone joins us. And then we'll get going with these readings. Oh, the number's gone up. The Keeper, yes, I'll be keeping this on YouTube. I'm making a recording as well. So if any problems with this version, I will be uploading a new one. Because I don't honestly trust YouTube at the moment. Or my connection. Hello, Harmonious Hyena. So I'm going to be trying my best to keep an eye on the chat as we go along, but since I'm also reading, I might miss something, so feel free to ask me questions after each story's done. And hello, Bellissimo Doggo. Oh, 5 people, I'm amazed. Enough of you want to listen to this. Yeah, I know, it's not a visual novel, and visually this is going to be very boring, just my ident up there. But I have the titles up there, so you should... Well, 2 of them you might know what to expect. Hey, Furry Slayer. Heath Street is just something I put together. So, I'll see what you think of that. But anyway, I hope you're all having a good Halloween, whatever time it is with you. Maybe turn off the lights, listen in the dark. But we're going to get started with some H.P. Lovecraft. And the story is Pickman's Model. Oh, you didn't think I'm crazy, Elliot. Plenty others have queerer prejudices than this. Why don't you laugh at Oliver's grandfather won't ride in a motor? If I don't like that damn subway, it's my own business. We got here more quickly anyhow in the taxi. We'd have to walk up the hill from Park Street if we'd taken the car. I know I'm more nervous than I was when you saw me last year. You don't need to hold a clinic over it. There's plenty of reason, God knows, and I'm lucky to be sane at all. Why the 3rd degree? You didn't used to be so inquisitive. Well, if you must hear it, I don't know why you shouldn't. Maybe you ought to anyhow. You kept writing me like a grieved parent when he heard I began to cut the art club and keep away from Pickman. Happy Halloween, the Keeper. Now that he's disappeared, I go round to the club once in a while, but my nerves aren't what they are. No, I don't know what's become of Pickman. I don't like to guess. You might have surmised I had some inside information when I dropped him. Oh, and that's why I don't want to think where he's gone. Well, let the police find what they can. It won't be much judging from the fact they don't know yet of the old North End place he hid under the name of Peters. I'm not sure I could find it again myself. Not that I'd ever try, even in broad daylight. Yes, I do know, or I'm afraid I know why he maintained it. I'm coming to that. I think you'll understand before I'm through why I don't tell the police. They'd asked me to guide them. I couldn't go back there even if I knew the way. There was something there, and now I can't use the subway and you may as well have your laugh at this too, go down to Sellers anymore. I should think you'd have known I didn't drop Pickman for the same old reasons that fussy old women like Dr. Reed or Joe Mino or Bosworth did. Morbid art doesn't shock me. When a man has the genius Pickman had, I feel it an honour to know him, no matter what direction his work takes. Boston F had a greater painter than Richard Upton Pickman. I said it at first, and I never swerved an inch either, even when he showed that ghoul feeding. That, you remember, was when Mino cut him. You know, it takes profound art and profound insight into nature to earn out stuff like Pickman's. Any magazine cover hack can splash paint around wildly and call it a nightmare or a witch's sabbath or a portrait of the devil. But only a great painter can make such a thing really scare or ring true. That's because only a real artist knows the actual anatomy of the terrible or the physiology of fear. The exact sort of lines and proportions that connect up with latent instincts or hereditary memories of fright, and the proper colour contrasts and lighting effects to stir the dormant sense of strangeness. I don't have to tell you why Fuseli really brings a shiver while a cheap ghost story frontispiece makes us laugh. There's something those fellows catch beyond life that they're able to make us catch for a second. Dore had it, Syme has it, and Garrel of Chicago has it, and Pickman had his no man ever had it before, I hope to heaven ever will again. Don't ask me what it is they see. You know, in ordinary art there's all the difference in the world between the vital, breathing things drawn from nature, or models and the artificial truck that commercial small fry reel off in a bare studio by rule. Well, I should say that the really weird artist has a kind of vision which makes models, or summons up what amounts to actual scenes from the spectral world he lives in. Anyhow, he manages to turn out results that differ from the pretender's mince pie dreams in just about the same way the life painter's results differ from the concoctions of a correspondence school cartoonist. If I'd ever seen what Pickman saw, but no. Here, let's have a drink before we get any deeper. Yeah, I wouldn't be alive if I had seen what that man, if he was a man, saw. You recall that Pickman's forte was faces. I don't believe anybody since Goya could put so much hell into a set of features or a twist of expression. And before Goya, you have to go back to the medieval chaps who did the gargoyles and chimeras on Notre Dame and Mont Saint-Michel. They believed all sorts of things, and maybe they saw all sorts of things too, for the Middle Ages had some curious phases. I remember you were asking Pickman yourself once, the year before you went away, whenever in thunder he got such ideas and visions. Wasn't there a nasty laugh he gave you? It was partly because of that laugh that Reed dropped him. Reed, you know, had just taken up comparative pathology and was full of pompous inside stuff about the biological and evolutionary significance of this or that mental or physical symptom. He said Pickman repelled him more and more every day, and almost frightened him. Toward the last, that fellow's features and expressions were slowly developing in a way he didn't like, in a way that wasn't human. He had a lot of talk about diet and said Pickman must be abnormal and eccentric to the last degree. Well, I suppose you told Reed, if you and he had any correspondence over it, that he'd let Pickman's paintings get on his nerves or harrow up his imagination. Well, I know I told him that myself. Then. But keep in mind they didn't drop Pickman for anything like this. On the contrary, my admiration for him kept growing. For that ghoul feeding was a tremendous achievement. As you know, the club wouldn't exhibit it, and the Museum of Fine Arts wouldn't accept it as a gift, and I can add that nobody would buy it. So Pickman had it right in his house till he went. Now his father has it in Salem. You know Pickman comes of old Salem stock and had a witch ancestor hanged in 1692. I got into the habit of calling on Pickman quite often, especially after I began making notes for a monograph on weird art. Probably it was his work which put the idea into my head. Anyhow, I found him a mine of data and suggestions when I came to develop it. He showed me all the paintings and drawings he had about, including some pen and ink sketches that would, I verily believe, have got him kicked out of the club if any of the members had seen them. Before long I was pretty nearly a devotee, or listened for hours like a schoolboy to art theories and philosophic speculations wild enough to qualify him for the Danvers Asylum. My hero worship, coupled with the fact that people were commencing to have less and less to do with him, made him get very confidential with me. And one evening he hinted that if I were fairly close-mouthed and none too squeamish, he might show me something rather unusual, something a bit stronger than anything he had in the house. "You know," he said, "there are things that won't do for Newbury Street, things that are out of place here, and that can't be conceived here anyhow. It's my business to catch the overtones of the soul, and you won't find those in a parvenu set of artificial streets on made land. Back Bay isn't Boston, it isn't anything yet, because it's had no time to pick up memories and attract local spirits. There are only ghosts here, they're the tame ghosts of a salt marsh and a shallow cove. And I want human ghosts, the ghosts of beings highly organised enough to have looked on hell and known the meaning of what they saw. The place for an artist to live is the North End. If any aesthete were sincere, he'd put over the slums for the sake of the mass traditions. God, man, don't you realise that places like that weren't merely made, but actually grew? Generation after generation lived and felt and died there, and in days when people weren't afraid to live and feel and die. Don't you know there's a mill on Copp's Hill in 1632, that half the present streets were laid out by 1650? Well, I can show you houses that have stood 2 centuries and a half. And it's just warning me things might not be too steady with the stream. You're sorry about that, but you can blame my internet supplier. It's the only choice I have. So sorry if you're having some problems listening. There's not much more I can do about that. So I'll just keep reading and hope everything's getting through to you. Well, I can show you houses that have stood 2 centuries and a half. And more, houses that witnessed what would make modern house crumble into powder. What do moderns know of life and the forces behind it? You call the Salem witchcraft a delusion, but I'll wager my 4 times great-grandmother could have told you things. Oh, they hanged her on Gallows Hill, with Cotton Mather looking sanctimoniously on. Mather, damn him, was afraid someone might succeed in kicking free of this accursed cage of monotony. I wish someone had laid a spell on him or sucked his blood in the night. Oh, thanks, guys. YouTube's just telling me that it's off. I can show you a house he lived in. I can show you another one he was afraid to enter in spite of all his fine bull talk. He knew things he was afraid to put into that stupid Magnalia or that puerile wonders of the invisible world. Look here. Do you know the whole North End once had a set of tunnels that kept certain people in touch with each other's houses and the burying ground and the sea? Let them prosecute and persecute above ground. Things were on every day they couldn't reach, and voices laughed at night that they couldn't place. Why, man, out of 10 surviving houses built before 1700 and not moved since, I'll wager in 8 I can show you something queer in the cellar. Well, it's hardly a month you don't read a workman finding bricked up arches and wells leading nowhere in this or that old place as it comes down. You see one near Henchman Street from the elevated last year. There were witches and what their spells summoned, pirates and what they brought in from the sea, smugglers, privateers, and, I tell you, people knew how to live and knew how to enlarge the bounds of life in the old times. This wasn't the only world a bold and wise man could know. Ha! And to think even today in contrast with such pale pink brains, even a clever supposed artist gets shudders and convulsions. The picture goes beyond the feelings of a Beacon Street tea table. The only saving grace of the present is too damn stupid to question the past very closely. What do maps and records and guidebooks really tell at the North End? Ha! Well, I guess I'll guarantee lead you to 30 or 40 alleys and networks of alleys north of Prince Street that aren't suspected by 10 living beings outside of the foreigners that swarm them. What do those people know of their meaning? No, Thurber. Those ancient places are dreaming gorgeously and overflowing with wonder and terror and escapes from the commonplace, and yet there's not a living soul to understand or profit by them. Or rather, there's only one living soul, for I haven't been digging around in the past for nothing. See here, you're interested in this sort of thing. What if I told you that I got into the studio up there where I can catch the night spirit of antique horror and paint things I couldn't even think of in Newbury Street? Naturally, I don't tell those cursed old maids at the club, with Reed, damn him, whispering even as it is I'm a sort of monster down the toboggan of reverse evolution. Oh yes, Thurber. I decided long ago that one must paint terror as well as beauty from life, so I did some exploring in places where I had reason to know terror lives. Well, I've got a place I don't believe 3 living Nordic men besides myself have seen. It isn't so very far from the elevator as distance goes, but it's centuries away as the soul goes. I took it because of the queer old brick wall in the cellar, one of the sort I told you about. That shack's almost tumbling down, so nobody else would live there. I'd hate to tell you how little I pay for it. The windows are boarded up, but I like that all the better since I don't want daylight for what I do. I paint in the cellar, one of the sort I told you about. The shack's almost tumbling down it, so nobody... Oops, I'm rereading myself here, I apologise for that. I paint in the cellar where the inspiration is thickest. I've had the rooms furnished on the ground floor. A Sicilian owns it, and I've hired it in the name of Peter's. Now, if you're game, I'll take you there tonight. I think you'd enjoy the pictures, for, as I've said, I've let myself go a bit there. It's no vast tour. I sometimes do it on foot. I don't want to attract attention with a taxi in such a place. We can take the shuttle at South Station for Battery Seat. After the after that, the walk isn't much. Well, Elliot, there wasn't much for me to do of that harangue, but keep myself from running instead of walking to the first vacant cab we could sight. We changed the elevator at the South Station, and about 12 o'clock had climbed down the steps at Battery Street and struck along the old waterfront past Constitution Wharf. I didn't keep track of the cross streets, and I can't tell you which it was we turned up, but I know it wasn't Greenough Lane. When we did turn, it was to climb through the deserted length of the oldest and dirtiest alley I ever saw in my life, with crumbling-looking gables, broken small-paned windows and archaic chimneys that stood out half disintegrated against the moonlit sky. I don't believe there were 3 houses in sight that hadn't been standing in Cotton Mather's time. Certainly I glimpsed at least 2 with an overhang. Once I thought I saw a peaked roofline, the almost forgotten pre-gambrel type, though antiquarians tell us there are none left in Boston. Beyond that alley, which had a dim light, we turned to the left into an equally silent and still narrower alley with no light at all, and in a minute made what I think was an obtuse angled bend toward the right in the dark. Not long after this, Pickman produced a flashlight and revealed an antediluvian 10-panel door that looked damnably worm-eaten. Unlocking it, he ushered me into a barren hallway with what was once splendid dark oak panelling. Simple, of course, but thrillingly suggestive of the times of Andros and Phipps and the witchcraft. Then he took me to a door on the left, lighted an oil lamp, and told me to make myself at home. Now, Elliot, I'm what the man in the street would call fairly hard-boiled. I'll confess that what I saw on the walls of that room gave me a bad turn. They were his pictures, you know, the ones he wouldn't paint or even show in Newbury Street. And he was right when he said he'd let himself go. Here, have another drink. I need one anyhow. There's no use in my trying to tell you what they were like, because the awful, the blasphemous horror and the unbelievable loathsomeness and moral fetor came from simple touches quite beyond the power of words to classify. There was none of the exotic technique you see in Sydney Sign, none of the trans-Saturnian landscapes and lunar fungi that Clark Ashton Smith uses to freeze the blood. The backgrounds were mostly old churchyards, deep woods, cliffs by the sea, brick tunnels, ancient panelled rooms or simple vaults of masonry. Copp's Hill burying ground, which could not be many blocks away from this very house, was a favourite scene. The madness and monstrosity lay in the figures in the foreground, for Pickman's morbid art was predominantly one of demonic portraiture. These figures were seldom completely human, but also approached humanity in varying degree. Most of the bodies, while roughly bipedal, had a forward slumping and vaguely canine cast. The texture in the majority was a kind of unpleasant rubberiness. I can see them now. Their occupations... Well, don't ask me to be too precise. They were usually feeding, I won't say on what. They were sometimes shown in groups in cemeteries or underground passages, and often appeared to be in battle over their prey, or rather their treasure trove. What damnable expression of Pickman sometimes gave the sightless faces of this charnel booty. Occasionally the things were shown leaping through open windows at night, or squatting on the chests of sleepers, worrying at their throats. One canvas showed a ring of them baying about a hanged witch on Gallows Hill, whose dead face held a close kinship to theirs. But don't get the idea that it was all this hideous business of theme and setting which struck me faint. I'm not a 3-year-old kid. I'd seen much like this before. It was the faces, Elliot. Those accursed faces that leered and slavered out of the canvas with the very breath of life. Oh, by God, I verily believe they were alive. That nauseous wizard had waked the fires of hell in Pickman, and his brush had been a nightmare-spawning wand. Give me that decanter, Elliot. There was one thing called the lesson. Heaven pity me that ever saw it. Listen, can you fancy a squatting circle of nameless dog-like things in the churchyard teaching a small child how to feed like themselves? The price of a changeling, I suppose. You know the old myth about the weed people leave their spawn in cradles in exchange for the human babes they steal? Pickman was showing what happens to those stolen babes, how they grow up. And then I began to see a hideous relationship in the faces of the human and non-human figures. He was in all his gradations of morbidity between the frankly non-human and degradedly human, establishing the sardonic linkage in evolution. The dog things were developed from mortals. And no sooner had I wondered what he made of their own young as left with mankind in the form of changelings, than my eye caught a picture embodying that very thought. It was that of an ancient Puritan interior, a heavily beamed room with lattice windows, a settle, and clumsy 17th century furniture, with a family sitting about while the father read from the scriptures. Every face but one showed nobility and reverence, but that one reflected the mockery of the pit. It was that of a young man in years, and no doubt belonged to a supposed son of the pious father, but in essence it was the kin of the unclean things. It was their changeling, and in a spirit of supreme irony Pickman had given the features a very perceptible resemblance to his own. By this time Pickman had lighted a lamp in an adjoining room and was politely holding open the door for me, asking me if I would care to see his modern studies. I hadn't been able to give him much of my opinions. I was still speechless with fright and loathing, but I think he fully understood and felt highly complimented. And now I want to assure you again, Elliot, I'm no mollycoddle to scream at anything which shows a bit of a departure from the usual. I'm middle-aged and decently sophisticated, and I guess you saw enough of me in France to know I'm not easily knocked out. Remember, too, that I just about recovered my wind and got unused to those frightful pictures which turned colonial New England into a kind of annex of hell. Well, in spite of all this, the next room forced a real scream out of me, and I had to clutch at the doorway to keep from keeling over. The other chamber had shown a pack of ghouls and witches overrunning the world of our forefathers, but this one brought the horror right into our own daily life. Gad, how that man could paint! There was a study called Subway Accident in which a flock of the vile things were clambering up from some unknown catacomb through a crack in the floor of the Boylston Street subway and attacking a crowd of people on the platform. Another showed a dance on Copp's Hill among the tombs with a background of today. Then there were any number of cellar views, with monsters creeping in through holes and rifts in the masonry and grinning as they squatted behind barrels or furnaces and waited for their first victim to descend the stairs. One disgusting canvas seemed to depict a vast cross-section of Beacon Hill, with ant-like armies of the mephitic monsters squeezing themselves through burrows that honeycombed the ground. Dances in the modern cemeteries were freely pictured, and the conception somehow shocked me more than the rest. A scene in an unknown vault, where scores of the beasts crowded about one who held a well-known Boston guidebook, was evidently reading aloud. All were pointing to a certain passage, and every face seemed so distorted with epileptic and reverberant laughter that I almost thought I heard the fiendish echoes. The title of the picture was Holmes, Lowell and Longfellow Lie Buried in Mount Auburn. So I gradually steadied myself and got readjusted to this second room of deviltry and morbidity, and began to analyse some of the points in my sickening loathing. In the first place, I said to myself, these things repelled because of the utter inhumanity and callous cruelty they showed in Pickman. That fellow must be a relentless enemy of all mankind, take such glee in the torture of brain and flesh, and the degradation of the mortal tenement. In the second place, they terrified because of their very greatness. Their art was the art that conceived. When we saw the pictures, we saw the demons themselves, and we were afraid of them. And the queer part was that Pickman got none of his power from the use of selecting or bizarrery. Nothing was blurred, distorted or conventionalized. Outlines were sharp and lifelike, and details were almost painfully defined. And the faces! It was not any mere artist's interpretation that we saw. It was pandemonium itself, crystal clear and stark objectivity. That was it, by heaven. The man was not a fantasist or romanticist at all. He didn't even try to give us the churning prismatic ephemera of dreams, but coldly and sardonically reflected some stable, mechanistic and well-established horror world which he saw fully, brilliantly, squarely and unfalteringly. God knows where that world could have been, or even glimpsed the blasphemous shapes that loped and trotted and crawled through it. Wherever the baffling source of his images, one thing was plain. Pickman was in every sense, in conception and execution, a thorough, painstaking and almost scientific realist. My host was now leading the way down the cellar to his actual study, and I braced myself some hellish effects amongst the unfinished canvases. As we reached the bottom of the damp stairs, he turned his flashlight to the corner of the large open space at hand, revealing the circular brick curb what was evidently a great well in the earthen floor. We walked nearer, and I saw they must be 5 feet across, with walls a good foot thick and some 6 inches above the ground level. A solid work of the 17th century, or I was much mistaken. That, Pickman said, was the kind of thing he'd been talking about, an aperture of the network of tunnels they used to undermine the hill. I noticed either it did not seem to be bricked up, and that a heavy disc of wood formed the apparent cover. Thinking of the things this well must have connected with if Pickman's wild hints had not been mere rhetoric, I shivered slightly, then turned and followed up a step and through a narrow door into a room of fair size, provided with a wooden floor and furnished as a studio. The settling gas outfit gave the light necessary for work. The unfinished pictures on easels or propped against the walls were as ghastly as the finished ones upstairs, and showed the painstaking methods of the artist. Scenes were blocked out with extreme care, and pencil guidelines told of the minute exactitude which Pickman used in getting the right perspective and proportions. Oh, the man was great. I say it even now, knowing as much as I do. A large camera on the table excited my notice, and Pickman told me he used it in taking scenes for backgrounds, so you might paint them from photographs in the studio instead of carting his outfit around the town for this or that view. He thought a photograph quite as good as an actual scene or model for sustained work, and declared he employed them regularly. There was something very disturbing about the nauseous sketches and half-finished monstrosities that lead around from every side of the room, and when Pickman suddenly unveiled the huge canvas on the side away from the light, I could not for my life keep back a loud scream, the second I'd emitted that night. It echoed and echoed through the dim vaultings of that ancient and nitrous cellar, and to choke back a flood of reaction that threatened to burst out as hysterical laughter. Merciful Creator! Elliot, I don't know how much was real and how much was a feverish fancy. It doesn't seem to me that earth can hold a dream like that. It was a colossal and nameless blasphemy, with glaring red eyes. It held in bony claws a thing that had been a man, gnawing at the head as a child nibbles at a stick of candy. Its position was a sort of crouch, and as one looked, one felt that any moment it might drop its present prey and seek a juicier morsel. But damn it all, it wasn't even the fiendish subject that made it such an immortal fountainhead of all panic. Oh, not that, nor the dog face with its pointed ears, bloodshot eyes, flat nose and drooling lips. It wasn't the scaly claws, nor the mould-caked body, nor the half-hooved feet. None of these, though any one of them might as well have driven an excitable man to madness. It was the technique, Elliot. The cursed, the impious, the unnatural technique. As I'm a living being, I never elsewhere saw the actual breath of life so fused into a canvas. The monster was there. It glared and gnawed and gnawed and glared, and knew that only a suspension of nature's laws could ever let a man paint a thing like that without a model, without some glimpse of the netherworld which no mortal unsold to the fiend has ever had. Pinned with a thumbtack to a vacant part of the canvas was a piece of paper now badly curled up. Probably, I thought, a photograph from which Pickman meant to paint a background as hideous as the nightmare it was to enhance. I reached out to uncurl and look at it, when suddenly I saw Pickman start as if shot. He'd been listening with peculiar intensity ever since my shocked scream had awakened unaccustomed echoes in the dark cellar, and now seemed struck with a fright which, though not comparable to my own, had in it more of the physical than the spiritual. He drew a revolver and motioned me to silence, then stepped out into the main cellar and closed the door behind him. I think I was paralysed for an instant. Imitating Pickman's listening, I fancied I heard a faint scurrying sound somewhere, and a series of squeals or bleats in a direction I couldn't determine. I thought of huge rats and shuddered. Then there came a subdued sort of clatter which somehow set me all in gooseflesh. A furtive, groping kind of clatter, though I can't attempt to convey what I mean in words. It was like heavy wood falling on stone or brick. Wood on brick? What did that make me think of? It came again and louder. There was a vibration as if the wood had fallen farther than it had fallen before. After that followed a sharp grating noise, a shout of gibberish from Pickman, and the deafening discharge of all 6 chambers of a revolver, fired spectacularly as a line tamer might fire in the air for effect. A muffled squeal or squawk and a thud. Then more wood and brick grating. A pause, and the opening of the door, which I confess I started violently. Pickman reappeared with his smoking weapon, cursing the bloated rats that infested the ancient well. Deuce knows what they eat, Thurber, he grinned. Those archaic tunnels touch graveyard and witch den and seacoast. But whatever it is, they must have run short, 'cause they were devilish anxious to get out. You get into them up, I fancy. Better be cautious in these old places. Our rodent friends are the one drawback, though I sometimes think they're a positive asset by way of atmosphere and colour. Well, Elliot, that was the end of the night's adventure. Pickman had promised me to show me the place, and heaven knows he had done it. He'd led me out of that tangle of alleys in a different direction, it seems. When we sighted a lamppost, we were in a half-familiar street with monotonous rows of mingled tenement blocks and old houses. Charter Street it turned out to be, perhaps too flustered to notice just where we hit it. We were too late for the elevated and walked back downtown through Hanover Street. I remember that walk. We switched from Tremont up Beacon, and Pickman left me at the corner of Joy, where I turned off. I never spoke to him again. Why did I drop him? Don't be impatient. Wait while I ring for coffee. We've had enough of the other stuff. I, for one, need something. No, it wasn't the paintings I saw in that place, though I'll swear they're enough to get him ostracised in 9/10 of the homes and clubs of Boston. And I guess you won't wonder now I have to steer clear of subways and cellars. It was something I found in my coat the next morning. You know, the curled-up paper tacked to that frightful canvas in the cellar. Thing I thought was a photograph of some scene he meant to use as a background for that monster. The last scare had come while I was reaching to uncurl it. Seems I had vacantly crumbled into my pocket. But here's the coffee. Take it black, Elliot, if you're wise. Yes, that paper was the reason I dropped Pickman. Richard Upton Pickman, the greatest artist I have ever known, and the foulest being that ever leaped the bounds of life into the pits of myth and madness. Elliot. Old Reed was right. He wasn't strictly human. Either he was born in strange shadow, or he'd found a way to unlock the forbidden gate. Oh, it's all the same now, for he's gone, back into the fabulous darkness he loved to haunt. Let's have the chandelier going. Don't ask me to explain or even conjecture about what I burned. Don't ask me either what lay behind that mole-like scrambling Pickman was so keen to pass off as rats. There are secrets, you know, which might have come down from old sailing times. Cotton Mather tells even stranger things. You know how damned lifelike Pickman's paintings were, how we all wondered where he got those faces. Well, that paper wasn't a photograph of any background after all. What it showed was simply the monstrous being he was painting on that awful canvas. It was the model he was using, and its background was merely the wall of the cellar studio in minute detail. But by God, Elliot, it was a photograph from life. And that was H.P. Lovecraft's Pickman's model. Oh, thanks, the twins. Furry ASMR. I've been told I can do that kind of thing doing my BBC voice. Well, that's the first story. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And now the next one is not going to be as good as the other two, I'll tell you now, but it's something I wrote a couple of years ago. I was submitting a couple of stories to an anthology, and I had an idea which didn't really work out, so I left it and rewrote it. But it's pretty much all set on the London Underground. Any of you know the Underground at all? Well, you don't really need to know what's going on. It's just kind of story, a setting. Oh, thanks for your Slayer. And I kind of feel it's sort of suitable for a night like this. Oh, thanks, guys. So that's the first one. And this one, it's set across 3 different nights. Oh, thanks, Wolferek. 3 different nights, and feel free to comment on this one. So you don't really need to know the underground. Some of it might make a little more sense. And if you happen to know the map, I do, and I know what I'm doing with this route he takes. I would really appreciate what you guys think about this, because it never got submitted. Anyway, here we go. Next story. Heath Street. The wind that all underground travellers know, the one that blows out of the tunnel to herald the arrival of a train. A man standing on the platform looks up as he feels it. An interesting looking man? Or perhaps to some, his blue eyes are deep set under heavy eyebrows. His beard is the wrong length to be following a trend, and his sandy hair is just shy of the point where he calls shaggy. Oh, he's not some office worker who stayed late to earn some brownie points. Denim jacket, jeans and a grey hoodie. Definitely not one of those drones. The train stops and he enters a quiet car, sitting down as if he needs to rest. A wolf design on the hoodies reveals he places his hands on the back of his neck and leans his head back. His eyes close for a moment, then open to focus on the line diagram above the windows. So, across the bank, then down to Stockwell. Up on the Victoria to Finsbury Park, and then westbound Piccadilly, he thought to himself. See how the time goes, then jump back onto the Northern for the final stretch. It was no fun to be travelling this late, but it's better than the alternative. Would it help if he could travel all night? Maybe, but then there was also the problem of overshooting and ended up past where he wanted to go if he fell asleep. The tunnel ring slid past the window to be replaced by Tottenham Court Road Station. An older couple entered his car, giving him a wary look as they did so. He could almost read their thoughts. Oh, watch out for that one. Another hairy layabout, probably drunk as well. So many people were transparent when you could watch them. Body language revealed a lot. They were sitting at the far end of the car, as far away as possible, within range of his peripheral vision. Yes, definitely a little nervous. Perhaps not used to being out this late. Maybe been to the theatre as a special treat. Now they have to deal with me on the tube. He smiled wryly at that. The train sped through the remains of British Museum Station. It's always at places like this he wondered how many passengers saw it, or even knew what it was. He'd always been interested in the underground. These monthly long journeys had given him more time to think and observe. On the deep level tubes, anyway. He gave the Aldwych branch its customary moment of silence as they pulled into Holborn. Another couple entered the car, causing the original pair to relax. Just wait until you realise that they're vampires who've taken the pledge are about to fall off the wagon, the man thought, though probably defaming the couple as he did so. Mind the gap. Mind the gap. The official anthem of Bank Station played as the man stepped out of the train. He took his time walking to the Northern Line platforms. Anyone interested enough to watch him, of whom there were none on the system, would have noticed a certain tiredness in his walk. He made his way to the southbound Northern platform and waited for the next train. This time he was more fortunate to have a more or less empty car for the trip. Another man joined him briefly, was more interested in listening to his music than paying attention to anyone else. Then change at Stockwell for the Victoria. Another quiet station at this time on a weekday night. As was usual on a night like this, part of his mind was very aware of everything around him. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Furry Slayer. Everything seems to be okay here. Let me just check. Okay. Everything seems to be working here. Maybe it's a YouTube thing. But please, guys, let me know if there are any problems, because I have no idea what's going on with this. As was usual, on a night like this, part of his mind was very aware of everything around him, while the rest was musing on other matters. His attention was drawn to a young man further along the platform. He was standing a little close to the edge and seemed to be worried about something. It might be nothing, but he decided to wander down the platform a short way. As he had hoped, the movement caught the other man's eye and he moved back from the edge a bit. He smiled at him and cast an eye up to the indicator. Still a few minutes to the next train. He didn't want to leave the man alone, as if he was right, then he couldn't be left alone. His faked aimless wandering brought him in line with one of the exits from the platform in time for him to see a staff member walking by. He managed to catch his eye and move so that he could see both men simultaneously. He spoke quietly to the attendant, who nodded and busied himself with something down the platform, closer to the young man. The man, although apparently just looking around generally, was watching the others and saw the staff member talking to the young man as the train arrived. Hopefully nothing would happen. He decided to assume that he would get some help and do well. If nothing else, it made him feel better about having to ride the trains on these nights. He continued his journey, contriving to miss the penultimate train at Leicester Square so he could stay a little longer underground. So he rode the last train of the night to Hampstead and got off there. Taking the stairs would delay things, but he was too tired to take that option. The lift it was. He frowned as he felt a stab of pain through his head. Getting closer to the surface meant that the pain would get worse. Not that he could do anything about it, just prepare for what was going to happen as best he could. He shoved his hands into his pockets as he left the lift and reluctantly walked to the station exit. Some 4 weeks later, the same man is standing on another deep underground platform. Hair a bit more trim now and slightly different clothes, but with the same body language of a man tired but not able to rest. He tried thinking of himself as some sort of Flying Dutchman, but being as he used the underground and was from Abercynon, the idea had failed at the first hurdle. Nor was he unable to get off at a station. It was just what happened when he left it that caused problems. Still, he couldn't deny that the underground at this time of night was a different underground that people saw during the day. Fewer trains, sometimes nobody else on the platform. Many regular travellers would never see it like this. Sticking to rush hours and early evening travel, he looked up as he felt the wind of an approaching train. Time to move on. He stepped onto the train and slumped into the first available seat, dragging a hand over his face. What he wouldn't give to be at home with a good book and a mug of tea, or maybe some scotch. Just taking it easy with nothing to worry about. A face came to mind. Of course he would think of him on a depressing evening like this. That was past and done with. Leave it alone. He tipped his head back and growled. This was turning to one of those nights where he could understand those who couldn't take it anymore and chose to jump in front of a tube train. He looked at the line diagram opposite. So, up as far as Finsbury Park, then back down on the Victoria. Finsbury Park made him think of the Northern City, which made him think of Moorgate. For crying out loud, was everything going to depress him tonight? He took a chocolate bar from a pocket and started eating it. Maybe he just needed some energy. There was nobody else in this car, which was a relief. Sometimes on nights like this, the worst thing was to be around other people. Being aware of the aside glances they would give if you couldn't keep the mask steady. Sometimes it would slip and the pain and stress he was going through would show in a growl or unguarded facial reaction. No, much better to be alone when things were like this. Even books weren't any help, his mind sliding off the page he was reading, or the real-world problems interfering with and blocking the world the writer was creating. That was King's Cross out the way. York Road would have been next. Wouldn't that make an interesting story? Someone on a modern train automatically gets out to the first stop after King's Cross and finds themselves inexplicably on the platform at York Road. Maybe not. Unless the writer was good at quickly explaining what was wrong. And everyone knew as much as he did. There it was. A vague, large tunnel that the train sped through. He closed his eyes for a moment as the train continued on. No. That was dangerous. Can't risk being carried onto an open section. He looked at his watch. He'd make it to Warren Street on the way back down before hitting the Northern. That way he'd go through Mornington Crescent. That was always fun to do. He might cheer himself up a bit, as far as possible as was possible on one of these nights. Finsbury Park and back to the late lavatorial design of the Victoria line, as someone had called it. The passageways and platforms were empty and echoing now, hardly anyone around. Someone should really make a modern creepy film set on the underground, late on a weekday night. No boarded up spooky houses, just the well-lit but strangely empty railway system. Spooky on its own way. Sounds could travel and echo along the empty passageways tunnelled deep underground. There were the strange winds generated by the trains. Then suddenly, the lone passenger. He jumped as somewhere what sounded like a spanner was dropped. Now he was scaring himself. More than a little bit ironic, as many people consider him the scariest thing in the system. Here was his train anyway. Time to get going. Back into central London. Well, zone 1 anyway. That was central London, wasn't it? Now he was debating useless trivia with himself. Not a good sign, for all signs were bad at this time on this sort of night. All too soon the train brought him to Warren Street and he crossed the Northern Line platforms. A shadow of the pain seemed to settle in his head, but that was probably just his own work, the stress of knowing what was going to happen. The train came in and carried him north. His mood lifted a bit as they stopped at Mornington Crescent, but descended steadily as he travelled on. Once more at Hampstead, the pain gnawing at him as the lift rose to a surface level. He forced himself to stay calm and not show any signs of it as he walked to the exit, nodding to a member of staff as he did so. It was a cloudy night, but he could feel the baleful influence as he stepped out into the street. He kept to the walk until he was clear of the station, then set off running to the Heath, the pain growing more intense. He could feel himself hunching and baring his teeth in response to it. As soon as he found cover, he pulled a bag from a pocket and started stuffing his clothes into it, trying to act while he still had control. His jeans went in just as the pain hit a new level. He started growling as he began to lose control. Fangs exposed and claws digging into his paws. There was nothing in existence but him and the pain. When it subsided, a furry paw grabbed the bag and stashed it far into a clump of bushes. The werewolf stretched its limbs and loped off. 28 nights later, the man standing on the northbound platform at Collier's Wood. This time the hoodie is replaced by a checked shirt covering a t-shirt with a wolf on it. He has the same tired look in his eyes, though a close observer might notice pain there as well. He's travelled further south for a change, which means travelling back on the same line. Sometimes people would miss their station and have to go back up once it wouldn't look too strange. A young woman walks onto the platform and moves up the far end. In her world, everyone travelling by underground is dangerous and to be avoided. An older man joins them waiting for the train. He stands a little distance away from the man, but close enough to look at him unobserved and wonder about him. A middle-aged woman walks onto the platform and takes a spot not far from the two men. Her gaze rests on the posters opposite while she was aware of what's around her. Outside the rain is falling, the full moon is hidden behind clouds, but down here on the underground it's warm and dry. The Edgware train pulls in and the werewolf in human form steps on board. Once more, he rides the deep tubes until late. Most people ignore him. This is London after all. Some are wary of him. He doesn't match their mental checklist of trustworthiness. A very few wonder what it'd be like to know him better. Down here under the earth he can avoid the influences of the surface until he's forced to face them. He can pretend that he is something other than what he is and no one is any the wiser. As usual, his last journey of the night is on the Northern Line to Hampstead. A member of staff is at the lifts there, waiting for the last of the northbound passengers to leave so we can lock up. A passenger winces and raises a hand to his head as he leaves the lift, causing the man to approach and ask if he was well. The passenger smiles and replies he just has a bad headache before wishing the man a good night. The underground man replies appropriately and watches as the passenger leaves. He shivers as his mind tries to persuade him the monster passed by, looking out through the passenger's eyes and showing in his fangs. Outside, footsteps can be heard speeding up until they are running in the direction of the Heath, running as if trying to escape what they carry with them. Oh, we've lost about half our viewers. That tells me all I need to know. Yeah, that's probably worthwhile me not sending that one in. Don't worry, there's better stuff coming. And now we've suddenly got a better connection. This is very weird here. Ah, no, it's gone back. Never mind. Anyway, for those of you who suffered through that one, next story is by Montague Rhodes James, M.R. James as he's generally known. He's actually born back in the Victorian era, died in 1936, so these stories are pretty old. And if you get the chance when you're done watching this, or right now if you want to, about 2000, the BBC did some of these stories with Christopher Lee reading them. There's about 4 of them. Basically, him playing James. He used to tell these things on Christmas Eve in his study at Cambridge. If you get the chance to find those, I really, really recommend that you watch those, because they are amazing. If you like what I do, you will love Christopher Lee's stuff. He's way better at this thing than I am, of course. That voice of his. But since we sadly no longer have him with us, you'll have to put up with me for this one. Oh, thanks, guys. Yeah, it was written for anthology, which is all about trains, so I went a little more into details than I would have otherwise. I was always throwing in a comedy reference in there. The reason he thinks Mornington Crescent is nice. Anyway, let me read you a better story. When did this copy come out? I've had this book for years. Let me think. 1992 this one was published. It's pretty worn. So this story is called "Oh Whistle, and I'll Come to You, My Lad," by Montague Rhodes James. And good point, Harmonious. Yeah, it's never really been edited because I never submitted it. Okay, I'm going to look it up. Anyway, I was going to tell you when this was written, but I can't find the page. Here we go. Oh, I suppose you'll be getting away pretty soon now. Full term is over, Professor, said a person not in the story to the Professor of Ontography, soon after they sat down next to each other at a feast in the hospitable hall of St. James College. The Professor was young, neat, and precise in speech. Yes, he said, my friends have been making me take up golf this term. I mean to go to the East Coast, in point of fact to Burnstow. I dare say you know it, for a week or 10 days to improve my game. I hope to get off tomorrow. Oh, Parkins, said his neighbour on the other side, you're going to Burnstow. Wish you'd look at the site of the Templars Preceptory and let me know if it would be any good to have a dig there in the summer. It was, as you might suppose, a person of antiquarian pursuits who said this, but since he merely appears in this prologue, there is no need to give his entitlements. Oh, certainly, said Parkins to the Professor. If you'll describe to me whereabouts the site is, I'll do my best to give you an idea of the lie of the land when I get back. Or I could write to you about it if you would tell me where you're likely to be. Oh, don't trouble to do that, thanks. Sometimes thinking of taking my family in that direction along. It occurred to me as very few of the English preceptories have ever been properly planned, I might have an opportunity of doing something useful on off days. The Professor rather sniffed at the idea that planning out a preceptory could be described as useful. His neighbour continued. The site, I doubt there's anything showing above ground, must be down quite close to the beach now. The sea has encroached tremendously, as you know, all along that bit of coast. I should think from the map this must be about 3/4 of a mile from the Globe Inn at the north end of town. Where are you going to stay? Oh, at the Globe Inn, as a matter of fact, said Parkins. I've engaged a room there. I couldn't get in anywhere else. Most of the lodging houses are shut up in winter, it seems, and as it is, they tell me the only room of any size I can have is really a double-bedded one, and they haven't a corner in which to store the other bed and so on. But I must have a fairly large room, for I am taking some books down and mean to do a bit of work. Though I don't quite fancy having an empty bed, not to speak of two in what I may call, for the time being, my study. Suppose I can manage to rough it for the short time I'll be there. What do you call having an extra bed in your room roughing it, Parkins? Said a bluff person opposite. Okay, I'll come down and occupy it for a bit. It'll be company for you. The Professor quivered, but managed to laugh in a courteous manner. By all means, Rogers, there's nothing I should like better. But I'm afraid you'd find it rather dull. You don't play golf, do you? "Oh, no, thank heaven," said rude Mr. Rogers. "Well, you see, when I'm not writing, I shall most likely be out on the links, and that, as I say, will be rather dull for you, I'm afraid." "Oh, I don't know. There's certainly be somebody I know in the place. But of course, if you don't want me, speak the word, Parkins. I shan't be offended. Truth, as you always tell us, is never offensive." Parkins was indeed scrupulously polite and strictly truthful. It is to be feared that Mr. Rogers sometimes practised on his knowledge of these characteristics. In Parkins' breast there was a conflict now raging, which for a moment or two did not allow him to answer. That interval being over, he said, "Well, if you want the exact truth, Rogers, I was considering whether the room I speak of be really large enough to accommodate both of us comfortably, and also whether, mind, I shouldn't have said this, you impressed me, you would not constitute something in the nature of a hindrance to my work." Rogers laughed loudly. "Oh, well done, Parkins," he said. "It's all right. I promise not to interrupt your work. Don't you disturb yourself about that. No, I won't come if you don't want me, but I thought I should do nicely to keep the ghosts off." Here he might have been seen to wink and nudge his next neighbour. Parkins might also have been seen to become pink. "Oh, I beg your pardon, Parkins," Rogers continued. "I ought to have said that. I forgot you didn't like levity on those subjects." "Well," Parkins said, "as you have mentioned the matter, I freely own I do not like careless talk about what you call ghosts. A man in my position," he went on, raising his voice a little, "cannot, I find, be too careful about appearing to sanction the current beliefs on subjects. As you know, Rogers, or as you ought to know, I think I've never concealed my views." "No, you certainly have not, old man," put in Rogers sotto voce. "I hold to any semblance, any appearance of concession, the view that such things might exist as equivalent to renunciation of all that I hold most sacred. But I'm afraid I have not succeeded in securing your attention." "Your undivided attention was what Dr. Blimber actually said," Rogers interrupted with every appearance of an earnest desire for accuracy. "But I beg your pardon, Parkins, I'm stopping you." "No, not at all," said Parkins. "I don't remember Blimber, but perhaps he was before my time. Well, I needn't go on. I'm sure you know what I mean." Yes, said Rogers rather hastily. "Just so, we'll go into it fully at Burnstow or somewhere." In repeating the above dialogue, I have tried to give the impression which it made on me, that Parkins was something of an old woman, rather hen-like perhaps in his little ways, totally destitute, alas, of the sense of humour, but at the same time dauntless and sincere in his convictions, and a man deserving of the greatest respect. Whether or not the reader has gathered so much, that was the character which Parkins had. On the following day, Parkins did, as he had hoped, succeed in getting away from his college and in arriving at Burnstow. He was made welcome at the Globe Inn, was safely installed in a large double-bedded room which we have heard, was able before retiring to rest to arrange his materials for work in apple pie order on a commodious table, which occupied the outer end of the room, and was surrounded on three sides by windows looking out seaward. That is to say, the central window looked straight out to sea, and those on the left and right commanded prospects along the shore to the north and south respectively. On the south he saw the village of Burnstow. On the north no houses were to be seen, but only the beach and the low cliff backing it. Immediately in front was a strip, not considerable, of rough grass, dotted with old anchors, capstans, and so forth. Then a broad path, then the beach. Whatever may have been the original distance between the Globe Inn and the sea, not more than 60 yards now separated them. The rest of the population of the inn was, of course, a golfing one, and included a few elements that call for special description. The most conspicuous figure was perhaps that of an ancient militaire, secretary of a London club and possessed of a voice of incredible strength, and views of a pronouncedly Protestant type. These were apt to find utterance after his attendance on the ministrations of the vicar, an estimable man with an inclination to a picturesque ritual, which he gallantly kept down as far as he could out of deference to East Anglian traditions. Professor Parkins, one of whose principal characteristics was pluck, spent the greater part of the day following his arrival at Burnstow in what he had called improving his game, in company with this Colonel Wilson, and during the afternoon, whether the process of improvement were to blame or not, I am not sure, the Colonel's demeanour assumed a colouring so lurid that even Parkins jibbed at the thought of walking home with him from the links. He determined, after a short and furtive look at that bristling moustache, those incarnadine features, it would be wiser to allow the influences of tea and tobacco to do what they could with the Colonel before the dinner hour should render a meeting inevitable. "I might walk home tonight along the beach," he reflected. "Yes, and take a look, there'll be light enough for that, at the ruins of which Disney was talking. Don't exactly know where they are, by the way, but I expect I can hardly help stumbling on them. This he accomplished, I may say, in the most literal sense, for in picking his way from the links to the shingle beach, his foot caught partly in a gorse root and partly in a biggish stone, and over he went. When he got up and surveyed his surroundings, he found himself in a patch of somewhat broken ground covered with small depressions and mounds. These latter, when he came to examine them, proved to be simply masses of flints embedded in water and grown over with turf. He must, he quite rightly concluded, be on the site of the preceptory he had promised to look at. It seemed not unlikely to reward the spade of the explorer. Enough of the foundations was probably left at no great depth to throw a good deal of light on the general plan. He remembered vaguely that the Templars, to whom this site had belonged, were in the habit of building brown churches. He thought a particular series of humps or mounds near him did appear to be arranged in something of a circular form. Few people can resist the temptation to try a little amateur research in the department quite outside their own, if only for the satisfaction of showing how successful they would have been if they only taken it seriously. Our professor, however, if he felt something of this mean desire, was also truly anxious to oblige Mr. Disney. So he paced with care the circular area he noticed and wrote down its rough dimensions in his pocket-book. Then he proceeded to examine an oblong eminence which lay east of the centre of the circle, and seemed to his thinking likely to be the base of a platform or altar. At one end of it, the northern, a patch of the turf was gone, removed by some boy or other creature feri naturi. It might, he thought, be as well to probe the soil here for evidences of masonry. And he took out his knife and began scraping away the earth. And now followed another little discovery. A portion of soil fell inward as he scraped and disclosed a small cavity. He lighted one match after another to help him see what nature the hole was, but the wind was too strong for all of them. By tapping and scratching the sides with his knife, however, he was able to make out there must be an artificial hole in masonry. It was rectangular, and the sides, top and bottom, if not actually plastered, were smooth and regular. Of course it was empty. No. As he withdrew the knife, he heard a metallic clink. When he introduced his hand, it met with a cylindrical object lying on the floor of the hole. Naturally enough, he picked it up, and when he brought it into the light, now fast fading, he could see that it too was of man's making. A metal tube about 4 inches long, and evidently of some considerable age. By the time Parkinson made sure there was nothing else in this receptacle, it was too late and too dark for him to think of undertaking any further search. What he had done had proved so unexpectedly interesting that he determined to sacrifice a little more of the daylight on the morrow to archaeology. The object which he now had safe in his pocket was bound to be of some slight value, at least he felt sure. Bleak and solemn was the view on which he took a last look before starting homeward. A faint yellow light in the west showed a links, on which a few figures moving towards the clubhouse were still visible. The squat Martello Tower, the lights of Aldsey village, the pale ribbon of sand intersected at intervals by black wooden groins, the dim and murmuring sea. The wind was bitter from the north, but it was at his back when he set out for the globe. It quickly rattled and clashed through the shingle and gained the sand upon which, but for the groins which had to be got over every few yards, the going was both good and quiet. One last look behind to measure the distance he had made since leaving the ruined Templars' church showed him a prospect of company on his walk, in the shape of a rather indistinct personage, who seemed to be making great efforts to catch up with him but made little, if any, progress. I mean, that there was an appearance of running about his movements, but the distance between him and Parkins did not seem materially to lessen. So at least Parkins thought, and decided he almost certainly did not know him, and it would be absurd to wait until he came up. For all that, company, he began to think, would really be very welcome on that lonely shore, if only you could choose your companion. In his unenlightened days he had read of meetings in such places, which even now would hardly bear thinking of. He went on thinking them, however, until he reached home, and particularly of one which catches most people's fancy at some time of their childhood. Now I saw in my dream that Christian had gone but a very little way when he saw a foul fiend coming over the field to meet him. What should I do now, I thought, if I looked back and caught sight of a black figure sharply defined against the yellow sky and saw that it had horns and wings? I wonder whether I should stand or run for it. Luckily the gentleman behind is not of that kind. He seems about as far off now as when I saw him first. Well, at this rate he won't get his dinner as soon as I shall. Oh, dear me, it's within a quarter of the hour of the time now. I must run. Parkins had, in fact, very little time for dressing. When he met the Colonel at dinner, peace, or as much as her as that gentleman could manage, reigned once more in the military bosom. Nor was she put to flight in the hours of bridge that followed dinner, for Parkins was a more than respectable player. When, therefore, he retired towards 12 o'clock, he felt he had spent his evening in quite a satisfactory way, and even for so long as a fortnight or 3 weeks, life at the Globe would be supportable under similar conditions. Especially, thought he, if I go on improving my game. As he went along the passages, he met the boots of the Globe who had stopped and said, "I beg your pardon, sir, but as I was brushing your coat now, there's something fell out of the pocket. I put it in your chest of drawers, sir. In your room, sir. Piece of pipe or something like that." "Oh, thank you, sir. You'll find it on your chest of drawers, sir." "Yes, sir. Good night, sir." The speech served to remind Parkins of a little discovery of that afternoon. It was with some considerable curiosity he turned it over by the light of his candles. It was a bronze, he saw. It was very much shaped after the manner of the modern dog whistle. In fact, it was... Yes, certainly it was. Actually no more no less than a whistle. He put it to his lips, for it was quite full of a fine, caked-up sand or earth, which would not yield to knocking, but must be loosened with a knife. Tidy as ever with his habits, Parkins cleared out the earth onto a piece of paper and took the latter to the window to empty it out. The night was clear and bright, as he saw when he opened the casement, and he stopped for an instant to look at the sea and note a belated wanderer stationed on the shore in front of the inn. Then he shut the window, a little surprised at the late hours people kept at Burnstow, and took his whistle to the light again. Why, surely there were marks on it, and not merely marks, but letters. A very little rubbing rendered the deeply cut inscription quite legible. The Professor had confessed, after some earnest thought, that the meaning of it was as obscure to him as the writing on the wall to Belshazzar. There were legends both on the front and back, the whistle. The one read thus, Fla, Fur, Bis, Flee. The other, Qui s'assiste qui venit. Well, I suppose I should be able to make it out, he thought. But I suppose I am a little rusty in my Latin. When I come to think of it, I don't even know what the word is for a whistle. The long one does seem simple enough. It ought to mean, who is this who is coming? Well, the best way to find out is evidently to whistle for him. He blew tentatively and stopped suddenly, startled and yet pleased at the note it elicited. It had a quality of infinite distance in it, and soft as it was, he somehow felt it must be audible for miles round. It was a sound, too, that seemed to have the power, which many scents possess, of forming pictures in the brain. He saw quite clearly for a moment a vision of a wide, dark expanse at night, with a fresh wind blowing, and in the midst lay a lonely figure. How employed he could not tell. Perhaps he would see more than not the picture being broken by the sudden surge of a gust of wind against his casement, so suddenly it made him look up. Just in time to see the white glint of a seabird's wings somewhere outside the dark panes. The sound of the whistle had so fascinated him that he could not help trying it once more, this time more boldly. The note was little, if at all, louder than before, and repetition broke the illusion. No picture followed, as he half hoped it might. But what is this? Goodness, what force the wind can get up in a few minutes! What a tremendous gust! Ah, there! I knew that window fastening was no use. Ah, I thought so. Both candles out. Oh, it's enough to tear the room to pieces. The first thing was to get the window shut. While you might count 20, Parkins was struggling with a small casement, felt almost as if he were pushing back a sturdy burglar, so strong was the pressure. Slackened all at once, and the window banged to and latched itself. Now to relight the candles and see what damage, if any, had been done. No, nothing seemed amiss. No glass even was broken in the casement. But the noise evidently roused at least one member of the household. The Colonel was to be heard stumping in his stockinged feet on the floor above and growling. Quickly as it had risen, the wind did not fall at once. On it went, moaning and rushing past the house, at times rising to a cry so desolate, as Parkins disinterestedly said, it might have made the fanciful people feel quite uncomfortable. Even the unimaginative, he thought, after about a quarter of an hour, might be happier without it. Whether it was the wind or the excitement of the golf or the researches in the preceptory that kept Parkins awake, he was not sure. Awake he remained, in any case, long enough to fancy, as I'm afraid I often do myself under such conditions, that he was the victim of all manner of fatal disorders, He would lie counting the beats of his heart, convinced he was going to stop work every moment, and entertain grave suspicions of his lungs, brain, liver, etc. Suspicions which he was sure would be dispelled by the return of daylight, which until then refused to be put aside. He found little vicarious comfort in the idea that someone else was in the same boat. A near neighbour, in the darkness it was not easy to tell his direction, was tossing and rustling in his bed too. The next stage was that Parkins shut his eyes and determined to give sleep every chance. Here again overexcitement exerted itself in another form, that of making pictures. Experto crede, pictures do come to the eyes of one trying to sleep, and are often so little to his taste he must open his eyes and disperse them. Parkins' experience on this occasion was a very distressing one. He found that the picture which presented itself to him was continuous. When he opened his eyes, of course, it went. But when he shut them once more, it framed itself afresh and acted itself out again, neither quicker nor slower than before. What he saw was this: a long stretch of shore, shingle edged by sand, intersected at short intervals with black groins running down to the water. A scene, in fact, so like that of his afternoon's walk that, in the absence of any landmark, it could not be distinguished therefrom. The light was obscure, conveying an impression of a gathering storm, late winter evening and slight cold rain. On this bleak stage at first no actor was visible. Then, in the distance, a bobbing black object appeared. A moment more and it was a man running, jumping, clambering over the groins, every few seconds looking eagerly back. The nearer he came, the more obvious it was that he was not only anxious, but even terribly frightened, though his face was not to be distinguished. He was, moreover, almost at the end of his strength. On he came. Each successive obstacle seemed to cause him more difficulty than the last. Will he get over the next one? Thought Parkins. It seems a little higher than the others. Yes, half climbing, half throwing himself, he did get over, and fell all in a heap on the other side, the side nearest to the spectator. There, as if really unable to get up again, he remained crouching under the groin, looking up in an attitude of painful anxiety. So far, no cause whatever for the fear of the runner had been shown. But now there began to be seen, far up the shore, a little flicker of something light-coloured, moving to and fro with great swiftness and regularity. Rapidly growing larger, it too declared itself as a figure in pale, fluttering draperies, ill-defined. There was something about its motion which made Parkins very unwilling to see it at close quarters. It would stop, raise arms, bow itself toward the sand, then run stooping across the beach to the water edge and back again, and then raising upright, once more continue its course forward at a speed that was startling and terrifying. The moment came when the pursuer was hovering about from left to right, only a few yards behind the groin where the runner lay in hiding. After 2 or 3 ineffectual castings hither and thither, it came to a stop, stood upright with arms raised high, and then darted straight forward towards the groin. It was at this point that Parkins always failed in his resolution to keep his eyes shut. With many misgivings as to incipient failure of eyesight, overworked brain, excessive smoking, and so on, he finally resigned himself to light his candle, get out a book, and pass the night waking, rather than be tormented by this persistent panorama, which he saw clearly enough could only be a morbid reflection of his walk and his thoughts on that very day. The scraping of match on box and the glare of light was to startle some creatures of the night, rats or what not, which he heard scurry across the floor from the side of his bed with much rustling. Dear, dear, the match is out, fool that is. But the second one burnt better, and a candle and book were duly procured, and over which Parkins pored till sleep of a wholesome kind came upon him, and that in no wrong space. For about the first time in his orderly and prudent life, he forgot to blow out the candle, and when he was called next morning at 8, there was still a flicker in the socket, and a sad mess of gutted grease on the top of the little table. After breakfast, he was in his room putting the finishing touches to his golfing costume. Fortune had again allotted the Colonel to him for a partner when one of the maids came in. "Oh, if you please," she said, "would you like any extra blankets on your bed, sir?" "Ah, thank you," said Parkins. "Yes, I think I should like one. It seems likely to turn rather colder." In a very short time the maid was back with a blanket. "Which bed should I put it on, sir?" she asked. "Oh, why that one, the one I slept in last night," he said, pointing to it. "Oh, yes. I beg your pardon, sir. You seem to have tried both of them. Leastways, we had to make 'em both up this morning." "Oh, really? How very absurd," said Parkins. "I certainly never touched the other, except to lay some things on it. Did it actually seem to have been slept in?" "Oh, yes, sir," said the maid. "Why, all the things was crumpled and thrown about all ways, if you'll excuse me, sir. Quite as if anyone hadn't passed but a very poor night, sir." "Oh, dear me," said Parkins. "Well, I may have disordered it more than I thought when I unpacked my things. I'm very sorry to have given you an extra trouble, I'm sure. I expect a friend of mine soon, by the way, a gentleman from Cambridge, to come and occupy it for a night or two. That will be all right, I suppose, won't it?" "Oh, yes, to be sure, sir. Thank you, sir. It's no trouble, I'm sure," said the maid, and departed to giggle with her colleagues. Parkins set forth with a certain determination to improve his game. "I'm glad to be able to report that he succeeded so far in his enterprise that the Colonel, who had been rather repining at the prospect of a second day's play in his company, became quite chatty as the morning advanced. And his voice boomed out over the flats, as certain also our minor poets have said, like some great bourdon in a minster tower. "Extraordinary wind that we had last night," he said. "On my old time we should have said someone had been whistling for it." "Should you indeed?" said Parkins. "Is there a superstition of that kind still current in your part of the country?" "Well, I don't know about superstition," said the Colonel. "They believe it all over Denmark and Norway as well as on the Yorkshire coast. Well, in my experiences, mind you, there's generally something at the bottom of what these country folk hold to and have held to for generations. But it's your drive, or whatever it might have been. The golfing reader will have to imagine appropriate digressions at the proper intervals." When conversation was resumed, Parkins said with a slight hesitancy, "Apropos of what you were saying just now, Colonel, I think I ought to tell you my own views on subjects are very strong. I am, in fact, a convinced disbeliever in what is called the supernatural." "What?" said the Colonel. "Do you mean to tell me you don't believe in second sight or ghosts or anything of that kind?" "In nothing whatever of that kind," returned Parkins firmly. "Well," said the Colonel, "it appears to me that at that rate so you must be a little better than a Sadducee." Parkins was on the point of answering that, in his opinion, the Sadducees were the most sensible persons he ever read of in the Old Testament, but feeling some doubt as to whether much mention of them was to be found in that work, he preferred to laugh the accusation off. "Perhaps I am," he said. "But here, give me my cleek, boy. Excuse me one moment, Colonel." A short interval. "Now, as to whistling for the wind, let me give you my theory about that. The laws which govern winds are really not perfectly known to fisher-folk in such a course, not known at all. A man or woman of eccentric habits, perhaps, or a stranger, is repeatedly on the beach at an unusual hour and is heard whistling. Soon afterwards a violent wind rises, or a man who could read the sky perfectly or possessed a barometer could have foretold that would. The simple people of a fishing village have no barometers, and only a few rough rules for prophesying weather. What more natural than the eccentric personage I postulated should be regarded as having raised the wind, or that he should clutch eagerly at the reputation of being able to do so. Now, take last night's wind. As it happens, I myself was whistling. I blew a whistle twice. The wind seemed to come absolutely in answer to my call. If anyone had seen me—" The audience had been a little restive under this harangue, and Parkins had, I fear, fallen somewhat into the tone of a lecturer. For the last sentence the Colonel stopped. "Oh, whistling, were you?" he said. "And what sort of whistle did you use? Play the stroke first." Interval. "About that whistle you're asking, Colonel, it's rather a curious one. I have it in my—" "No, I see it left it in my room. As a matter of fact, I found it yesterday." And then Parkins narrated the manner of his discovery of the whistle, upon hearing which the Colonel grunted and opined that, in Parkins' place, he should himself be careful about using a thing that belonged to a set of papists, of whom, speaking generally, it might be affirmed that you never knew what they might have been up to. From this topic it diverged to the enormities of the vicar, who had given notice on the previous Sunday that Friday would be the feast of St. Thomas the Apostle, and there would be a service at 11 o'clock in the church. This and other similar proceedings constituted, in the Colonel's view, a strong presumption that the vicar was a concealed papist, if not a Jesuit, and Parkins, who could not very readily follow the Colonel in this region, did not disagree with him. In fact, they got on so well together in the morning, there was no talk of either side of their separating after lunch. Both continued to play well during the afternoon, or at least well enough to make them forget everything else until the light began to fail them. Not until then did Parkins remember he'd meant to do some more investigating in the preceptory, but it was no great importance, he reflected. One day was good as another, he might as well go home with the Colonel. As they turned the corner of the house, the Colonel was almost knocked down by a boy who rushed into him at the very top of his speed, and instead of running away, remained hanging on to him and panting. The first words of the warrior were naturally those of reproof and objurgation, but he very quickly discerned that the boy was almost speechless with fright. Inquiries were useless at first. When the boy got his breath, he began to howl and still clung to the Colonel's legs. He was at least detached, but continued to howl. "What in the world is the matter with you? What have you been up to? What have you seen?" said the two men. "Oh, I seen it wave at me out the window," wailed the boy. "I don't like it." "Oh, what window?" said the irritated Colonel. "Come, pull yourself together, my boy." "The front window it was at the hotel," said the boy. At this point, Parkins was in favour of sending the boy home, but the Colonel refused. He wanted to get to the bottom of it, he said. It was most dangerous to give a boy such a fright as this one had had, and if it turned out that people had been playing jokes, they should suffer from it in some way. And by a series of questions, he made up the story. The boy had been playing about on the grass in front of the globe with some others. Then they had gone home to their teas, and he was just going, when he happened to look up at the front window and see it waving at him. It seemed to be a figure of some sort, in white as far as he knew. Couldn't see its face, but it waved at him, and it wasn't the right thing, not saying not the right person. Was there a light in the room? No, he didn't think to look if there was a light. Which was the window? Was it the top one or the second one? The second one it was. The big window got two little ones at the side. "Oh, very well, my boy," said the Colonel after a few more questions. "You run away home now. I expect it was some person trying to give you a start. Or at the time, like a brave English boy, you just throw a stone. Well, no, not that exactly, but you go and speak to the waiter, or to Mr. Simpson, the landlord, and... yes, and say that I advise you to do so." The boy's face expressed some of the doubt he felt as the likelihood of Mr. Simpson lending a favourable ear to his complaint, but the Colonel did not appear to perceive this and went on. "And here's a sixpence. No, I see it's a shilling, and you be off home and don't think any more about it." The youth hurried off with agitated thanks, and the Colonel and Parkins went round to the front of the globe and reconnoitred. There was only one window answering the description they had been hearing. "Well, that's curious," said Parkins. "It's evidently my window the lad was talking about. Will you come up for a moment, Colonel Wilson? We ought to be able to see if anyone's been taking liberties in my room." They were soon in the passage, and Parkins made as if to open the door. Then he stopped and felt in his pockets. "This is more serious than I thought," was his next remark. "I remember now that before I started this morning, I locked the door. It is locked now. What's more, here's the key." And he held it up. "Now," he went on, "the servants are in the habit of going to one's room during the day when one is away. I can only say that, well, I don't approve of it at all." Conscious of a somewhat weak climax, he busied himself and opened the door, which was indeed locked, and in lighting candles. "No," he said, "nothing seems disturbed." "Oh, goodbye, I shot myself. I enjoyed it." "I'll accept your bed," put the Colonel. "Oh, excuse me, that isn't my bed," said Parkins. "I don't use that one. But it does look as someone has been playing tricks with it." Well, it certainly did. The clothes were bundled up and twisted together in most tortuous confusion. Parkins pondered. "That must be it," he said at last. "I disordered the clothes last night in unpacking. They haven't made it since. Perhaps they came in to make it, and that boy saw them through the window, and then they were called away and locked the door after them. Yes, I think that must be it." "Well, ring and ask," said the Colonel. This appealed to Parkins as practical. The maid appeared, and, to make a long story short, deposed that she had made the bed in the morning when the gentleman was in the room, and hadn't been there since. No, she had no other key. Mr. Simpson, he kept the keys. He'd be able to tell the gentleman if anyone had been up. Well, this was a puzzle. Investigation showed that nothing of value had been taken, and Parkins remembered the disposition of the small objects on tables and so forth, well enough to be pretty sure that no pranks had been played with them. Mr. and Mrs. Simpson furthermore agreed that neither of them had been given the duplicate key of the room to any person whatever during the day. Nor could Parkins, fair-minded man as he was, detect anything in the demeanour of master, mistress, or maid that indicated guilt. He was much more inclined to think that the boy had been imposing on the Colonel. The latter was unwontedly silent and pensive at dinner and throughout the evening. When he bade good night to Parkins, he murmured in a gruff undertone, "You know where I am if you want me during the night." Yes, thank you, Colonel Wilson, I think I do, but isn't much prospect of my disturbing you, I hope. Oh, by the way," he added, "did I show you that old whistle I spoke of? I think not. Well, here it is." The Colonel turned it over gingerly in the light of the candle. "Can you make anything of the inscription?" asked Parkins as he took it back. "Oh, no, not in this light. What do you mean to do with it?" "Oh, well, when I get back to Cambridge, I shall submit it to some of the archaeologists there and see what they think of it. And very likely, if they consider it worth having, I may present it to one of the museums." Said the Colonel. "Well, you may be right. All if I knew if it were mine, I should chuck it straight into the sea. It's no use talking, I'm well aware, but I expect that with you it's a case of live and learn. I hope so, I'm sure, and I wish you a good night. He turned away, leaving Parkins in act to speak at the bottom of the stair, and soon each was in his own bedroom. By some unfortunate accident, there were neither blinds nor curtains at the windows of the Professor's room. The previous night he had thought little of this, but tonight there seemed every prospect of a bright moon rising to shine directly on his bed, and probably wake him later on. When he noticed this, he was a good deal annoyed, but with ingenuity which I can only envy, he succeeded in rigging up, with the help of railway rugs, some safety pins, and a stick and umbrella, a sort of screen which, if it only held together, would completely keep the moonlight off his bed. And shortly afterwards he was comfortably in that bed. When he had read a somewhat solid work long enough to produce a decided wish for sleep, he cast a drowsy glance around the room, blew out the candle, and fell back upon the pillow. He must have slept soundly for an hour or more, when a sudden clatter shook him up in a most unwelcome manner. In a moment he realised what had happened. His carefully constructed screen had given way, and a very bright frosty moon was shining directly on his face. This was highly annoying. Could he possibly get up and reconstruct the screen, or could he manage to sleep if he did not? Some minutes he lay and pondered over the possibilities, then turned over sharply, and with all his eyes open lay breathlessly listening. There had been a movement, he was sure, in the empty bed on the opposite side of the room. Tomorrow he would have it moved. It must be rats or something playing with it. It was quiet now. No. The commotion began again. There was a rustling and shaking, surely more than any rat could cause. I can figure to myself something of the Professor's bewilderment and horror, for I have, in a dream 30 years back, seen the same thing happen. But the reader will hardly, perhaps, imagine how dreadful it was to him to see a figure suddenly sit up in what he had known was an empty bed. He was out of his bed in one bound and made a dash to the window, where lay his only weapon, the stick with which he had propped his screen. This was, as it turned out, the worst thing he could have done, because the personage in the empty bed, with a sudden smooth motion, slipped from the bed and took up a position with outspread arms between the two beds and in front of the door. Parkins watched in horrid perplexity. Somehow the idea of getting past it and escaping through the door was intolerable to him. He could not have borne, he didn't know why, to touch it. And as for it touching him, he would sooner dash himself through the window than have that happen. It stood for the moment in a band of dark shadow, and he had not seen what its face was like. Now it began to move in a stooping posture, and all at once the spectator realised with some horror and some relief that it must be blind, for it seemed to feel about with its muffled arms in a groping and random fashion. Turning halfway from him, he became suddenly conscious of the bed he had just left, and darted towards it, and bent over and felt the pillows in a way which made Parkins shudder as he never had in his life thought possible. In a very few minutes it seemed to know that the bed was empty, and then, moving forward into the area of light and facing the window, it showed for the first time what manner of thing it was. Parkins, who very much dislikes being questioned about it, did once describe some of it in my hearing, and I gathered that what he chiefly remembers about it is a horrible, an intensely horrible face of crumpled linen. What expression he read upon it he could not tell or would not tell, but that the fear of it went nigh to madden him is certain. But he was not at leisure to watch it for long. Formidable quickness it moved into the middle of the room, and as it groped and waved, one corner of its drapery swept across Parkins' face. He could not, though he knew how perilous the sound was, he could not keep back a cry of disgust, and this gave the searcher an instant clue. It leapt towards him upon the instant, and the next moment he was halfway through the window backwards, uttering cry upon cry at the utmost pitch of his voice, and the linen face was thrust close into his own. At this, almost the last possible second, deliverance came, as you had guessed. The Colonel burst the door open and was just in time to see the dreadful group at the window. When he reached the figures, only one was left. Parkins sank forward into the room in a faint, and before him on the floor lay a tumbled heap of bedclothes. Colonel Wilson asked no questions, but busied himself in keeping everyone else out of the room and getting Parkins back to his bed. And he himself, wrapped in a rug, occupied the other bed for the rest of the night. Early on the next day Rogers arrived, more welcome he would have been a day before, and the three of them held a very long consultation in the Professor's room. At the end of it, the Colonel left the hotel door carrying a small object between his finger and thumb, which he cast as far into the sea as a very brawny arm could send it. Later on, the smoke of a burning ascended from the back premises of the Globe. Exactly what explanation was patched up for the staff and visitors of the hotel, I must confess I do not recollect. The Professor was somehow cleared of the ready suspicion of delirium tremens, and the hotel of the reputation of a troubled house. There's not much question as to what would have happened to Parkins if the Colonel not intervened when he did. He'd either have fallen out of the window or else lost his wits. But it's not so evident what more the creature that came in answer to his whistle could have done than frighten. Well, there seemed to have been absolutely nothing material about it, save the bedclothes of which had made itself a body. The Colonel, who remembered a not very dissimilar occurrence in India, was of the opinion that if Parkins had closed with it, it could really have done very little, and its one power was that of frightening. The whole thing, he said, served to confirm his opinion of the Church of Rome. There is really nothing more to tell, but, as you may imagine, the Professor's views on certain points are less clear-cut than they used to be. His nerves, too, have suffered. He cannot even now see a surplice hanging on the door quite unmoved, and the spectacle of a scarecrow in a field late on a winter afternoon has cost him more than one sleepless night. So that's about 90 minutes of solid reading aloud. That was fun anyway. I hope you guys enjoyed that. But those were the 3 stories I wanted to tell you. And Brian, if you're still here, I'll be recording my next password video, which will be a Tyson thing this coming weekend. I don't know if Saturday or Sunday. I will do that then. So there's more password coming on, but I have to check if Howley's released the Smoke Room yet, because that hopefully will come out for patrons. If you're a patron to Tennis, say Shuichi's update has just come out. I saw Basket did that, so I've got some stuff to do. And Inspector Waffles has a new demo. That's a point-and-click pixel art game. If you want to check that out, it's on itch, and it's a lot of fun. Well, thanks, Titus. And so unless anything has something they particularly want to say, I think we might as well wrap it up here. I can let you go back to whatever fun Halloween things you're doing. I have to wait for this delay, isn't it? Oh, thanks, Harmonious. The password will be a recorded one. It's interesting to do the live stream, but I don't think I'll do too many of these. It works better if I record. You can watch it on your own time. But for those who've been here the whole time, and even if you just dropped in for a while, well, thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed the stories. And I don't know, maybe we can do this in a year's time, next Halloween. Anyway, thanks all of you. Until next time I do something like this. Bye for now.